2 days after the incursion into Poland, was to announce a new deployment, which is called Eastern Sentry, which is a more integrated and a stronger deterrence and defense posture along the eastern flank, from the Baltic to the Mediterranean and obviously to the Black Sea as well.
Romania has become the second NATO country to detect Russian drones in its airspace. It follows reports last week of Poland saying it had shot down at least 3 Russian drones which had entered its airspace. In response to the unprecedented violation of NATO airspace, the Foreign Office has summoned the Russian ambassador. But in the face of growing Russian aggression, how should NATO respond? Let's talk to Oana Lungescu, the longest-serving NATO spokesperson and the first woman and first journalist to hold the post. Welcome to Times at One. What should NATO do in response to these drone incursions?
NATO's already responded, and so have NATO allies. But of course, there's much more to do, because clearly the message from Russia with all these drone incursions is that they have no intention to stop their war in Ukraine. And if anything, they may intend to escalate it. What both Poland and Romania have done is to intercept and track the drones. The Romanian Defense Ministry said that they had also enabled the pilots to shoot down the drone that they tracked into Romanian airspace on Saturday. But in the end, the pilots, when they had contact, assessed that there was a risk of collateral damage and decided not to bring it down. And then they saw it leaving Romanian airspace.
But how much of a test of NATO resolve are these drone incursions? How provocative are they for a even more robust and muscular response from NATO?
Yeah, clearly they are meant as a provocation. They're meant to probe NATO air defenses. Basically to see how quickly NATO allies and NATO as a whole respond. Are the allies united in their response? What sort of capabilities they're using? So all of these things is what Russia will be watching very closely. Clearly, an incursion of the size that we've seen in Poland last week, with at least 19 drones coming into Polish airspace throughout the whole night for about 7 hours, followed just a few days later by this other drone incursion into the airspace of Romania, is something that NATO has to react to. What we've seen until now...
But how should they react? Because if they respond to such aggression, how much do they risk further escalation?
Well, this is about self-defense. I think it's quite clear these drones were in NATO airspace, in the airspace of Poland and Romania, and they are fully within their rights to intercept illegal aircraft that enter their airspace. What NATO did just 2 days after the incursion into Poland was to announce a new deployment, which is called Eastern Sentry, which is a more integrated and a stronger deterrence and defense posture along the eastern flank, from the Baltic to the Mediterranean and obviously to the Black Sea as well. And that includes more planes and sea and land assets provided by, among others, France, but also the UK. And it means greater integration of what is already there in terms of enhanced air policing missions, which NATO has, both in the Baltic area and in Romania and Bulgaria.
But the Estonian Prime Minister, who's been interviewed in The Times, has called on European NATO allies to start jointly procuring weapons. Do you agree with that?
Well, what is clearly, there is a clear need for NATO allies to do much more in terms of using much cheaper and more sustainable types of both sensors and drones to track and detect and kill drones, so that they don't just use expensive jet fighters such as the F-35, F-16s that have been used both in Romania and in Poland. But they have a sort of what the Baltic countries call a drone wall, which would be able to detect and protect against this sort of swarms of drones, which we've seen, of course, in Ukraine, but which Russia seems intent to be testing in NATO airspace as well.
Right.
And that's what NATO is doing.
And
NATO is working to both develop and procure this type of drones, especially by working much more closely with Ukraine, which, of course, has the experience of how to adapt very quickly to this type of drone warfare. And there is a joint training center actually in Poland where Polish, but also other NATO allies will be working much more closely with Ukraine to see what sort of solutions would be best for this type of attacks.
As you know, Donald Trump has backed off from sanctions until, he says, NATO members stop buying Russian oil. Is that the right approach?
Well, it's an interesting approach by President Trump, who sent this letter through social to NATO allies, because, of course, most NATO allies and members of the EU have actually weaned themselves off from Russian gas and oil, with the main exception of two countries, Hungary and Slovakia, whose autocratic leaders are also quite close to President Trump themselves, and in NATO, Turkey, who is not a member of the EU but is in NATO and has been hedging its position when it comes to both Russia and Ukraine, so is trying to take a sort of middle position. So you could argue that perhaps President Trump is trying to put pressure on his own allies, Hungary and Slovakia, to stop importing Russian gas and oil, which is something that certainly people here in Brussels at the European Union would welcome. But it's not quite clear that that's going to work. The EU is currently working on its 19th package of sanctions against Russia, so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays.
Anything more you would like to see from Donald Trump in terms of dealing with Russia?
I think what people, certainly in Central and Eastern Europe, would want to see is a much stronger signal and message from President Trump of deterrence against Russia and of understanding that it's Russia that is the aggressor. Ukraine is the victim of aggression, and the US is part of NATO and is part of the solidarity against Russia's aggression. What we've seen until now is some rather cryptic messages from President Trump saying, well, maybe the incursion into Poland was a mistake. Actually, Prime Minister Tusk of Poland made very clear it was not a mistake, and it's hard to believe it could have been a mistake. On the other hand, we see that the acting US ambassador to the UN, the US ambassador to NATO, Secretary Rubio, have all expressed their solidarity in much clearer terms than President Trump.
Oana Lungescu, thank you very much for talking to us.